Nisambula Vinaka, and welcome to Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. And we welcome to the show today research student and teaching assistant at the University of the South Pacific in Suva, Mr. Jope Tarai. Now, Mr. Tarai is dedicated to research in areas of diplomacy, Pacific politics, youth development, social media, and gender. But Mr. Tarai, thank you so much for joining us.
Vinaka, thank you for having me on the show. Big Bula Vinaka to your listeners and to everybody that will be watching this later on, possibly in the evening. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. Now, it's a first of a kind to be held in the Pacific. You took center stage as part of TEDx in front of a live audience at USB in Suva this year. But I'm not sure if everyone knows about TEDx yet, but I know that there have been quite a few people who've watched the video that you uploaded online. But you shared frankly about your struggle growing up in a conservative indigenous family. You also spoke about having to go through domestic violence in your home and the effect that this experience has had on you. But before we carry on, Mr. Tarai, could you please tell us a brief history of TEDx and how it got off the ground as a first for the Pacific in Suva?
To be very honest, TEDx, the first time I heard of it was when I was approached about a year and a half ago, I think, by Rachel Nicole and Jody Kilby, who had talked about it to me. I've always followed TED Talks online, which is a bigger platform for sort of innovative ideas, so anybody that has an idea and so on. So when I was approached during that time to talk about or be invited to be part of TEDx, I was really surprised, and that's how it started. I think Rachel and Nicole is a license holder for it, and so they have a committee. So from that, I was able to get in contact with them, or they contacted me, and we started having discussions around TEDx and how and what it's about. And so that's the first time I got to hear of it and got involved.
Okay, so you actually got invited.
Well, yeah. Don't read much into that. There's nothing.
Okay, so I mean, okay, if you got invited, you must have been really happy. Because, I mean, you liked the idea of it.
Yeah. I was, at first I was really surprised and humbled as well that I was invited to be a part of it, in large part because I never thought I had much of any idea what to share with the world or share with at least Fiji. And so when it started out, I initially thought about talking about maybe one of my research interests, or maybe some aspects around my dissertation that I'm currently writing. I thought it was going to be an opportunity to share something around academia or something like that.
Okay.
And then that greatly changed over the
all
series.
Of a sudden.
Yeah, all over the series of meetings that we had, and I realized I learned a lot of things too about TEDx and how things are very different in different platforms of having to share ideas.
Okay, so TEDx is a world thing as well?
Yeah, TEDx is a world thing. TED, if I'm correct, stands for Technology, Education and Design. So TEDx is a little bit more specified for like smaller audiences, or I think for when you started off, I believe. So it really, being a global aspect, allows for people to share a lot of ideas and a lot of insights that they may have or think that would be applicable to certain issues. So that, of course, generated a lot of interest and excitement for me to be involved as being sort of the first ever in Fiji, and that sort of idea of being the first to be a part of something was really exciting, yeah.
Okay, so when you did do your part during the event at, was it the USB, did you have a big crowd that was watching?
Yeah, it was specified within 100 people. I think that's part of the guideline of when you start TEDx. I believe that there's a specified number in the audience, and so that had to be followed as such. Even though unfortunately a lot of people wanted, applied for an invitation, only 100 was given because of the initial specifications of when you start off in a country or in a region, so to speak.
Okay.
So there was only 100, and I mean, if we had the chance, probably would be great to have more. But possibly for the next one, we would be allowed, or it would be allowed to have more people.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, have a huge crowd, because I mean, it's really inspirational to see what everyone spoke about. Like you said, ideas and
ideas.
innovations.
Yeah, definitely. Even
Yeah.
apart from my talk, the other talks, I mean, I would strongly encourage people to go and watch it online. If you
Yes.
if you didn't have the opportunity to watch it on the day, you can always watch it on YouTube. You can just search in TEDx Suva.
Right.
The other talks as well are really outstanding in their own right. I mean, even sitting back, because you're preparing all the time, you don't realize the huge amount of ideas too that the other talks bring in.
Yes.
Up until when everything finished and settled, and then I got to watch everyone else's video, I thought, wow, I never even realized how insightful and powerful a lot of the other ideas and videos are. So I strongly encourage people to watch the other videos as well. Yeah.
Yes, I would encourage them as well. Now, you created quite a stir on social media this
Please
year.
don't believe in the rumors.
But anyway, after uploading the video of your powerful testimony of how you had struggled with your experience with domestic violence as a child. Now, you spoke of how in the indigenous community, men's power and privilege when compared to the women is unmatched. Okay, so do you think, is there any hope of this sort of mentality where men see themselves as superior to women can ever change?
Boy, that's a very loaded question. It's a big one.
Okay, well, okay, you can think, no worries.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe you
yeah.
might like to start off somewhere else and then end with that one.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's sort of like the gist that people tend to take away from it. But the essence of what I was trying to highlight is the abuse of that power and privilege. So the power and, or in other words, the entitlement that indigenous Fijian men or men in general have in a society.
Yes.
Exactly. When it becomes abused. So when it becomes abused, I was directly referring to how there's sort of an implied idea that men need not be responsible for their actions when we do something wrong, or we need not be asked to take accountability or be held accountable for these actions. So the aspects around power and privilege in that regard that I was highlighting was very simple examples.
Oh, yes.
Very simple examples, but the bigger aspects that are really being shown up in the talk is that the abuse of it. So you have typical things like in indigenous Fijian family, or the oiko, if someone is asking the father, what are you doing? You did something wrong. Who are you to question me?
That's exactly right. Very interesting, but we'll be back in a moment on Speak Your Mind on your only classic hits radio station in Fiji, Gold FM. We're back on Speak Your Mind, Gold FM, only the classic hits. This is your only classic hits radio station in Fiji. Thank you so much for your company. Speak Your Mind is a live radio talkback, and we have the delayed coverage shown on FBC TV. And our guest today, Mr. Jope Tarai, a research student and teaching assistant at the University of the South Pacific. Well, I got to know of you because I actually, watched on social media, and I watched the clip, and I was really touched by how you delivered. I thought that was really brave of you, and I just really loved how you highlighted the issue of indigenous families, how they overrule their women too much. I mean, not in a correct way. And, I was really amazed also at how you analyzed why it happens. Yeah. And I thought that was really good as well. So, I mean, like the example that you said, you can't question the man of the house. He is to be respected like a king.
Yeah. I have to emphasize here, I think there's a lot of, or at least in the responses that I got, there's a simplistic assumption that all indigenous, or some people assumed that I was sort of criticizing all Fijian men. And and I'm glad I got an opportunity to come and talk today. It was because I wanted to highlight that it's not so much that, but it's looking at the aspects of what we are entitled to in our indigenous communities. So, I mean, by virtue of any men, any person, especially as an indigenous Fijian man or as a man, we are entitled to having particular levels of privilege in what we can do, and what we sort of have this particular thing where we almost can do anything. And so there's a level of people assuming or always talking about, oh, he's a guy. Boys will be boys, the common analogy. Boys will be boys, men will be men. So if we do something wrong, or if we tend to do things that are typically assumed to be, oh, that's part of the way they are, it seems like we can't be questioned for it or be held to account for it. So I began to observe this growing up as a child. While on the other hand, the aspects of responsibility are usually cast on the women. So if the man is acting out, typically it would be assumed that the woman is doing something wrong. So I have to really clarify that this was based on what I saw as growing up as a child. And of course, I cannot generalize that it happens to every Fijian man. Not all Fijian men are violent or abuse their power and privilege. But the prevalence of domestic violence does underpin the fact that the abuse of this power and privilege, when continued unquestioned or at least unexamined, breeds this capability where we feel like we can do whatever we want without having any consequences or be held accountable for these particular actions.
That's exactly right. And another thing is that how you said even the women, they seem to accept it as if it's normal.
It's not so much the women, I must emphasize. It's sort of anybody, actually. I think everybody in a society where violence becomes normalized, like it's almost celebrated. When you look at the world that we live in, and largely even in our societies. When I was growing up, I remember to a point when my mother was in such a state, she believed it was, the way business was supposed to be conducted in the family. If she stepped out of line, you start to see the traits of normalizing that violence. So she began to believe it was okay. And also society indirectly, at least during that time when I was growing up, it was sort of taken as this is part and parcel of being married. Yeah, they will have their ups and downs. Okay, it's a few broken bones. Okay, they'll get back together. There's not really an examination or a discussion around, okay, this has to stop, this is not right. And also this implication that somehow a woman is a man's property. So, and so being a person's property, you have very little say in what is done to you or what you can do. So these underlying aspects as well was, I began to observe much earlier as a child. And I thought, okay, probably this is the way the world is supposed to be. And then when you grow up much older, you realize...
Think for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. You have to think for yourself, and that there's something wrong with this, especially when it culminates in a huge amount of implications, not only on the two people involved, but also people in the family. So the children, the extended family, you get awkward during social functions. And as children, you really have those... moments where friends talk to you about their family time, and you think, well, my family is not like that. There's something wrong with mine. Or maybe there's something wrong with your family.
Exactly,
and so the way you're brought up becomes very skewed, and so you have a huge amount of time to try and sort of rebalance a lot of these things. So it's really intertwined. And again, I have to emphasize, when we feel or when we perpetuate the small things that we do, like, oh, it's okay, that's just part of their relationship, or it's just a small broken bone or something like that, or the small things that we tend to just let
overlook.
go of. Overlook
when it's not supposed to be. It's wrong. I mean, you can't.
We should definitely acknowledge it. And I think largely a lot of the sort of social change or mind change within this regard can come from the men, from us the men, because we have that entitlement, that power and privilege. I mean, with religion in its play, with culture in its play, we're seated at that position where we can really change things for the better.
You have time. I mean, this is the young generation now. Because what's going on, what you experience is something that has been going on from many years ago.
Absolutely. It's something that has always been there. And I always think about it in the sense that, in movies, we have the villain or we have the devil with horns and things like that. And so everybody has this idea that there's going to be either a devil coming to kill you or alien invasion or something. And we never acknowledge that this is an invisible demon, that we perpetuate, in the smallest of things that we do, like when in-laws especially, there's an argument and people say, "Oi, have authority over your wife, talk to your wife."
Yeah, they blame the woman.
Yeah,
women.
is that,
She's
there's
acting out of
yeah.
place. Oh my
So
gosh.
like there's no sort of balance in perspective of responsibility and accountability. And of course we again, people, we can't generalize, but there are tenets of it where we tend to be too conveniently obsessed over the fact that, oh, it's always going to be the woman's fault. She's not doing something right. She's doing this wrong. She's not praying hard enough. She's not a good Christian. She's not a good religious woman. She's not, and those sort of conversations, if they are not sort of discussed or at least talked about or thought about in a different way, could really be those silent contributors to what ultimately then becomes a domestic violence statistic.
Exactly. I mean, gosh, murder, yeah?
Yeah. When it culminates in that, yeah.
I know. And I mean, the way that you've explained it, I mean, you could have turned out the exact opposite, because normally, but anyway, we'll have to get back to this when we come back soon on Gold FM, only the classic hits. Speak your mind. Welcome back to Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits, and our radio talkback continues with our friend here, Mr. Jope Tarai, who's a research student and teaching assistant at the University of the South Pacific, and made famous by his delivery of, well, he is talking about what he spoke about on that night, TEDx, in front of a live audience at USB in Suva this year. Now, I spoke about how you could have turned out the exact opposite of what you are now. And, it is truly amazing to me, because sometimes they say, like, if someone is brought up in that kind of environment, they sometimes follow what their father had been doing. Yeah. So what would you have to say about this?
Well, I think the first thing that I have to highlight, I think that not everybody turns out that way, and definitely you're right, I could have turned out that way, and like all human beings, we all have a temper, we all get upset, we all get angry about things. I'm not really sure why things may have turned out differently for me, but I'm sure there's always a means and a possibility, if things like the TEDx video and various other discussions, if we can get to start talking about it and be open to talking about it, can really instigate things. I think for my part, I am very fortunate, and I have to acknowledge the people that really took over after my mom passed on. I'm surrounded by very powerful women. So when my mother passed, she has a lot of sisters. I hope I'm watching. Yeah, so a lot of sisters. So I have a lot of aunts who are very powerful and very, they are very vocal. And they brought me up in such a way that after my mom died, that they continuously remind me, with love.
Yes.
With love.
Which was what we need.
Yeah, with love, that my mother's passing and what she went through was completely unjust. That wasn't right. And but ironically, they would always remind me to not carry hate or against the man that my mother married. But they continuously talk about or remind me that there are some things that we need to continuously talk about or reconsider, that there's something skewed. And in a way, I realized that it probably came from their father, my late grandfather, my namesake. He was always called the person who will always think of things inside out. So he has criticisms of everything, whether it be the bus tire. So a lot of these things, I think, being surrounded by my maternal family, who are very, in a way, cynical and yet insightful, really led me to consistently question. And then also, I somehow am surrounded by critical thinkers all the time. Ironically, my group of friends consistently question everything, and question me every time. So I suppose that contributed, and I also have to attribute a lot of this to the fact that my mother herself was also a person that consistently questioned a lot of things, but she could question everything except her own husband. And so that is something that to this day I always wonder, and I suppose it's evident that somehow the manipulation and misinterpretation of all these things, vows and culture and religion, can become prison
A
models.
prison for
and in
a
prisons,
woman.
Yeah,
That is absolutely right, a prison.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just relating a lot of these things and how. And
It's
so
the truth. It's the truth.
And it comes to a point where, and also when you think about somebody for a long time, and I have to admit, I guess everybody has it. When you lose a loved one, they sort of haunt your mind, and they live in your soul for such a long time.
Yes.
And so you keep thinking about it, and you wonder, and you wonder, and you wonder, and so somehow you realize that you can't entertain these small things. And but I have to acknowledge I'm not perfect. Like sometimes when I get upset with myself, I feel like beating myself up. And we do put ourselves through a certain amount of pain for certain things. But I suppose continuously thinking and talking about these things and engaging in discussions, I think, is very important, because you test yourself and you put yourself through having to question yourself. Being able to hold yourself to account too is something that's tough. But I suppose if we don't do something differently, we end up having the same outcome, which is something that we keep having
for the generations and generations to come. I mean, your mom, she actually lived in a prison, but she thought that she was doing the right thing.
Yeah, my mother was completely convinced that that was her duty, and what defines people's duties, or what we do ultimately, at least in our society, comes from culture and religion, which are very too powerful. I look at them. If these two were villains, or not villains, but power sources in a movie, it'll be this big power source. But in society, they're so powerful. They influence the way people think.
Right.
They influence what people do, people's actions, how they speak to other people, how they dress.
Like it's almost like morals to them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
absolutely.
but something different is that you're making black white and white black, which is doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and this aspect, I mean, we have to admit, at least when I was growing up in the 90s, it was sort of told like, okay, this is the way things are. In similar way, I mean, now we're frowning upon and saying, this is not right, and so on and so on. And there's so much work that's been done trying to, say that this is absolutely wrong. But we also have to acknowledge that historically, I mean, humanity at a certain point believed that, or we were led to believe that slavery was okay. And now we don't, of course, it's wrong, absolutely wrong. So it only started to come out of it if people started talking about it, and it led to movements and so on. So I think if it's instigated in this way, that we talk about it, we bring it out to the open, we bring it out for public discussions, and we question ourselves, that at some point or the other, small changes, it's the small things that ultimately make the biggest difference. So the small things that we do, questioning ourselves, to challenge ourselves. No, I can't do this to a girl. No, I shouldn't catcall a girl. That's not a sign of my bravado. That's just a sign of my idiotic mentality.
Exactly.
A proper way to approach a girl, just be polite and so on. And these small things that may sound so lame, as they call it. These things actually matter the most, because it ultimately shows how much we are either imposing our dominance and so on. And so it really has these multifaceted aspects to it that I think can only come about if we start talking about it, and that we as men, and indigenous Fijian men, and all men, to start talking to each other as well. Because of course, the women's movement has been doing so much work, and also we have a role to just have normal conversations around it.
Exactly. I mean, coming from a man is just makes it more sweeter for us. But on Speak Your Mind, Gold FM, only the classic hits. We'll be back in a moment. Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. And our interesting discussion here is with Mr. Jope Tarai, who is a research student and a teaching assistant at the University of the South Pacific, and just discussing of how the indigenous community, where it has taken place, like you said, it's part of their tradition. And like you said, it's culture, and it also has to do with religion, of how women are being oppressed.
Yeah. And when I did the talk and then the responses, one of the criticisms I got, which is very fascinating. Well, actually, when I did the talk and then the online discussions, the comments and responses came in what I saw as three categories. So the first category being people agreeing with it, they're saying yes, it's good, blah blah, which is fine, and I completely appreciate the sentiments. The second one being people very emotional about my late mother and what she went through, and late demise due to cancer, culminated through all those years of abuse and so on. And then the third one, which is the third category, which is one that I looked forward to, which a lot of people felt strongly about culture and religion, and that the sentiments shared were very, very defensive about culture and religion.
Yeah, I thought they would be.
And in large part, their defense, or one of their first criticisms, and I think this is a very simplistic one and a too easy one, but I suppose I have to acknowledge it. A lot of them continuously said, you can't generalize, not all Fijian men are like that. And it's absolutely true.
Yes, it's true. But I mean, looking at numbers, that's, the majority, I would say.
And largely we have to acknowledge that. Of course, not all Fijian men are violent.
Of course, yes.
But the talk is trying to highlight the abuse of that power and privilege when we take advantage of that entitlement that we have, which largely is influenced by culture and religion. So, of course, religion, and as I shared in the talk, they're biblical texts, and it's not limited to those biblical texts, which in a way secures and consolidates a man's position not only in his home, but in the society in general. So he already has an elevated position, and then culture already sort of fortifies that. So we have a significant level that we have, which in all parts and parcel of life, it's worked for the system in the society that we live. But when we tend to abuse that consistently and we hold it over others, no, I'm the man, you can't question me.
Right.
Who are you? What is this? When we limit ourselves to not being held accountable and having those discussions, this is where we see that it basically starts to create what we call in the Pacific as the culture of silence, like, quote unquote.
Right.
Being silent. What can be misconstrued for respect can be utilized to abuse that power and privilege and abuse people around us. But not all men do this. Some men actually, I used to envy my friends growing up as a child in high school. Their fathers were completely awesome, and I thought to myself, my goodness, this is amazing. They use that power and privilege, or they use their position as per their responsibility to really make a loving home, to really be respectful, to really be honest and be open.
And that's just something that gets to me, because you said yourself that you didn't really know your father, even though he was living in the same home as you.
Yeah.
He didn't show you any love?
Yeah, to be very honest, to this day I try to understand. I think people are raised differently. I felt like he was more a stranger to me, and it's really, I think the word to use is interesting.
It's actually quite sad. Maybe he was treated like that when he was little.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You don't know, right?
Yeah. Actually, that's one of the things I always thought. Maybe he was treated differently growing up. Maybe this was the only way he would express himself, or maybe there were deep-seated problems. One thing I noticed
must
is that
have been.
Yeah, but one thing I noticed, sort of this idea that as men we are not supposed to be open about our feelings.
Exactly. Don't cry.
Yeah, don't cry. You're not
men
supposed
don't cry.
Yeah, men don't cry.
That's rubbish.
He would only express it when he's really drunk. But usually with that aggression. And I noticed that
that's sad. Actually.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I really, I think one of the things that I wanted to express is, for us as men, it's okay to be open. We have to find ways to communicate, to express ourselves before having to resort to alcohol, because you start to think you're Superman or you're Hulk, and then things go terribly wrong because you're just a human being. So these particular aspects, I think, growing up is really unfortunate, and it's something that is good for us to really open up and talk about. our feelings, what we are upset about, and having open discussions is really something that we probably don't encourage, because we feel like that's what we are told or thought. That's a girl's role. That's what women do. They talk about their feelings. No, we should also.
Jeez, I mean, okay, you look like you're a human being,
Yeah.
not a robot or something like that. Yeah.
But when we consistently suppress it, I mean, what other way will it? Eventually, it'll explode, and unfortunately, it
that's
explodes
true.
in somewhat very harsh ways that we start to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, about, the indigenous families, social functions, I was surprised. I mean, even the guys get to eat before the children and the women. Is that right?
Well, I feel like we're very lucky that way.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So that's one privilege that you enjoy.
Yeah, that's one. I think I use that in the talk because it's a common one, and I never forget the look on my aunt's faces.
When you get to
Yeah,
go and
when we
serve your
get to a
food
big
first.
social function, and I can just see their faces. They're not gonna say it, but their faces are so obvious that they are suffering, and that they're smiling, but deep down inside they haven't slept really well. And then at the same time the kids are crying, or they have to get dressed up and ready.
Really hard.
So these things are normal. I mean, I'm not, and people misconstrue this. I have had people who said, how dare you criticize Fijian culture?
Right.
This is the way we do things. And I thought, has anybody ever asked the women whether it's okay with them to have very little sleep and everybody's demanding them to cook the best meal? And then at the end of it all, they have to put the babies again to sleep or the children to sleep.
Oh my gosh! I mean, it's just exhausting.
Yeah,
I've actually seen it because my father, he is an indigenous Fijian from Taviuni, and when he passed away, so I mean, that was the first time I actually got to see how a funeral was done. Man, I was really surprised. I felt so sorry for the women. But we've run out of time again on Speak Your Mind, Gold FM, only the classic hits. Welcome back to Speak Your Mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. We continue with our very interesting chat here with Mr. Jope Tarai. And he has a video that you can easily go online and just type in TEDx, and you'll be able to see how he delivered on that video, as well as his team members. But your very interesting topic, I know you must have copped a lot of flack with it too, with the indigenous people of, how you have questioned the role of a man. And like I was just saying about how you had functions, men get to eat first. And I mean, I remember saying what my grandmother used to say. There's a saying, they think that they're God's gift to women. So, I mean, that was something. But, I mean, you're not criticizing your culture.
Yeah.
The culture is there. But what would you like to see, improve in the culture?
Yeah. I think just to go back to what your grandmother said, correct?
God's gift to women.
I think we're God's gift to each other if we respect each other, as opposed to we're God's gift to mankind, which largely certain people unfortunately tend to think a lot that way. I think, to be very honest, based on the responses and apart from the people criticizing particular sentiments, which is expected, conservative elements are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think is actually good is the fact, what we can do is the fact that we are talking about it.
Okay.
I think that's absolutely amazing.
Because, you're actually putting something in someone's brain, educating them to just to think for themselves. Don't listen to what you're told.
Exactly.
I mean, don't believe everything you're told.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm trying to educate you, take everything as I say and believe it. No, but for them just to instigate discussions and ideas. And when I was writing up the talk, I had this sort of objectives in mind, sort of flying in the air when I was writing. I was thinking, I really have to have an objective out of this. And one of the key things out of the three, I had three. The first one was to confront or instigate discussions amongst men, amongst indigenous Fijian men. I wanted the men to talk. The second part was, apart from provoking, talking, was to incite that discussion and see the discussions, like what sort of things get thrown up.
Right.
And then the third one, of course, is a more personal one. I felt like I needed to set some sense of justice for my late mother.
Yes.
And also because during the time of preparing to write for the talk, it was during the month of April. And 14 years ago, 2002, if that's 14 years, in the month of April, my late mother finally passed on. And so when I was writing, I was thinking of something to write. And actually, it's very funny because all the speakers had something to talk about. I had nothing.
You were still searching.
Yeah, I was
for what
still
you want
searching
to
for
talk
what.
about, right.
But so the month of April was there, and it's usually a reflective month for me because of my late mother. And I suppose we all go through that, reassessing your life and what this person has done for you and
Yes.
what you learn from them. And so one of the things that I ultimately, and then basically that became the centerpiece to write about. But interestingly, all throughout, there's this word just flying in the air for me in my head. Fijian men, Fijian men, Fijian men, Fijian men. I don't know why, but it was just flying in my head. Fijian men, Fijian men. And I realized people, there are a whole number of things that can instigate indigenous Fijians. One is identity. The other one is defining their identity and possibly land. Once these things, once you throw it into people's faces, they'll just talk.
That's what you
So,
wanted.
yeah,
right?
so that's what I want. So those three objectives just basically became fulfilled in a way. And then people started reacting. And it was amazing because even the criticisms, which I absolutely loved, because people allowed me, it's like they opened their door, their house, and ushered me into every part of the house. In other words, they gave me free pass into their minds, into their brain essentially, and their souls, like what they were thinking about, their hearts.
Exactly.
So people, responding in a conservative way, saying, no, we can't do this, we can't do that, there's something wrong with you, da, 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 da. What is your plan, what is your hidden agenda, and all of these things. There's a conspiracy or something like that.
You're made to look out like the bad guy.
Yeah, no, but it's fine.
Yeah,
if you don't want to stand for something, you're gonna expect something like that.
Yeah.
You have to expect these kind of things. Yeah. So it was very, very interesting, and it allowed me to see how people think. And interestingly, the criticisms are jumping back or reacting from culture and religion.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
stems from this. This
Yeah,
is the root
yeah,
of
yeah.
what's causing all these actions that men are taking.
It not so much causes it, but it sort of becomes. It's not. I think it's about time that it's reformed. It's
Yeah.
not bad, but I think we can tweak it
Yeah.
to really change things for the better.
Because I
it's
reckon-
very powerful. It's very powerful and influential. So that's why when we see religious leaders, when they say things that can be very controversial or somewhat regressive, that's very lethal.
Yes.
Because we see it every Sunday, we see it all around the world. Religious leaders are very powerful people. So if you can get them to be very progressive,
Yeah.
to ask for this to be rethought or changed, these things can change for the better. But
Yeah.
when the same position is continuously regurgitated, you can't really expect much difference.
Yeah. You cannot, like I said, make black white and white black.
Yeah.
You've experienced it. You are a living testimony of how it hurts the family unit, as for children. But, think of your children, for
Yeah,
goodness
yeah,
sake.
yeah.
You should have a healthy home, a loving home, a husband and wife who respects one another,
Yeah.
who do, give and take situation,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, I think I have to also clarify here. I'm not sort of I'm not testimony, or I get very sensitive when people say, "Oh, you're very brave." I'm not brave. The people that are brave are the women that are currently struggling, as we speak, possibly through domestic violence, and those challenges that they are having to endure, and they're trying to survive. And those that have survived it, those are the brave people, the women. And even the men who have reconsidered their actions, who've made those changes in their lives or sought help.
Yeah.
There are counseling services. There are things that we can do that can be done for the better. And largely it depends on what we do and how we're willing and what actions we're willing to take. So I think the brave people are out there, and even stronger people helping day to day counsel people and address these issues
Yes.
very, very closely to people who may need this help, or
Yeah.
the help that's necessary.
Well, that's really nice, Mr. Tarai. So, I mean, that is your message to if a family is living in such a situation is to change, just to be happy, live a happy
Yeah.
life. I mean, gosh, life isn't that supposed to be what life is about, to be happy?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not happy, something's wrong, right?
Yeah, if you're not happy, and I have to also admit, if we don't actually talk to one another, we have no idea what's happening.
Communication.
Yeah, communicating and things like that.
Between the
And
husband and
yeah.
wife, I mean, but not using communication power with
Oh,
the
yeah.
fist. That's the worst part. Man, unfortunately, I could chat with you all
Yeah.
afternoon, but
Yeah.
it's come to an end.
Unaka.
And I thank you so much for
Thank
being a voice for the women in Fiji as well as around the world, and for your dear mom,
Unaka.
Vinaka. Speak your mind on Gold FM, only the classic hits. Thank you a lot for your company. You can join us again next week. Nisamo Demanda.